Yep. Hi there, it's Chris and Rob. We're back on the 17th of February. It's 9 o'clock UK time. I'm in the UK. Rob's in Singapore. We've done a chat previously a couple of weeks ago, and we've decided to come back for round two, so to speak, where we're discussing our differences concerning the pandemic, vaccines, COVID generally. We just clashed on so many issues that it was we felt it was really important to get together and have some civil discussion about it and how we could both get it either so the perception of that time so different from each other. Very fruitful chat last week, I thought, and quite civil, and hopefully we can repeat at this time and discuss some different topics as well. Over to you, Rob.
Yeah, no, thanks, Chris. And I would concur with everything that you said. I found it really interesting and quite valuable, partly because it kind of demystifies, the idea that the person you're talking to on the other side is just a keyboard warrior and a demon who's got the polar opposite views that you do. So it's good to have that, and I credit you for this, right?
It's a good thing for you to say that, Rob. I agree with that as well.
Yeah. So it's good to have that face to face, and know that you're talking to a decent human being. And like you said, it allows you to introduce a bit more civility into the conversation, which can only be a good thing. I watched the first couple of clips back, and I hated it, to be honest. I hated just I'm massively self-conscious is the first thing, but I was quite disappointed in myself for a couple of things. I'm sure you'll have the same observation for yourself. Yeah. Things that I should have said, things that I maybe should have handled differently. And one key thing around decorum that I noticed with myself was that I interjected too much. And I think you and I agreed beforehand that we would not cut each other off, although interjection is okay when things need to be clarified, but we shouldn't cut each other off. And when I listened back, I did that a bit too much. I won't make an excuse for it other than to say that the looming time frame that we had because of the Zoom trial account, I guess we were working with at the time, I was cognizant of that in the background. So I think that was some of it, but nonetheless, I'm going to try and do better on that this time. And we haven't got that same time pressure. So hopefully it will be better. My thought on this, Chris, and I'm open to hearing yours, is that we should touch a couple of the topics that we probably didn't get to resolution on the last time around, but maybe spend the second half just focusing on something new but related. But I'm very open to how you want to do it.
I'm happy for you to lead with your suggestions, Rob. I really am. I'd agree. Have you got anything you'd like to touch on from last week? Go on. I keep saying last week, but I mean, like, it was 3 weeks ago, wasn't it? So
yeah.
Last time.
So I do. Yeah, I do. But I want to align with you that these are the right things, I guess, first of all. One of them is just a clarification in the sloppy language that I was using last time around that I wanted to just straighten out a little bit, really, because I think to some degree it was the root cause of the misunderstanding that you and I had specifically on the VEAs stuff, right? So I'll do that first, but then the second topic that I'd like to just retouch on and hopefully try and bring to some kind of resolution is on the specific data point you gave me on miscarriages and the heightened risk of them as a result of COVID vaccines. So on the first part, right, on VEAs, when I was listening back, I was kind of mortified to realize that some of the misunderstanding, again, I believe is just down to the fact that I'm using language which is not consistent with that is being used by the reporting systems themselves. And a lot of the time I was using the word reaction. And the first time I listened, I noticed that I used it, and then I repeatedly used it. And I should have noticed that in myself and corrected myself at some point during the conversation, but I never did. And I can see how, by talking about adverse reactions, the automatic insinuation is that a reaction is caused by something, right? And we kind of make an automatic link back to vaccines. And what I should have been talking about is adverse events, which is a much more neutral use of language, and is more accurate with, again, what is being proposed being purported to be reported out of the system. So it's a VEA's the vaccine's adverse event reporting system. So that's the first thing I just wanted to clear up, is I'm saying reaction. I should have been saying event. And I think that pivot in language could have avoided a very large amount of the misunderstanding that you and I were having.
I didn't click with what you were trying to say. It was partly my fault for not clicking with what you were trying to say. To be honest, I was looking beyond what your point was, because I found it a little bit difficult to comprehend that you would dismiss all of that evidence outright. And that's why I was looking beyond that and thinking, he can't mean that. I can't mean that. So that's where there was, but I fully understand what you mean now. And we really did labour the point for 5 minutes, and then it bridged into the next section. So it was, it did labour, and I prefer to, if you want to make any points about the actual points being made, then great. But I think to labour over how we just talked across each other for about last week.
Totally. So I guess let me just make one point, and then I'm happy to close the book and just move on to the next chapter, which is, I made an analogy in the last discussion that we had around, being stood in the town square with a clipboard and just asking people randomly to sign their name as they walk past, and then monitoring the adverse, I was using the word reactions, monitoring the adverse events that they may suffer after having signed their name. And the point I was trying to make there was that some of the adverse events that were being suffered, such as, for example, dizzy spell, there are even things in there around like broken leg, from you wouldn't believe it. These things, there's no reason to believe they wouldn't have, the people involved would not have suffered those adverse reactions after having signed my clipboard, as opposed to having taken a vaccine. That's the point I was making.
I understand that.
The word reaction, my word reaction, has just muddied that up completely. So that's the bit I wanted to straighten out.
My understanding of it, and I wouldn't read anything into it. Misplacing a word, it's not something I'm going to leap on and say, and be pedantic about that. I understood exactly what you meant once it clicked. That's all. Yeah.
Okay. And then the second point, if you want to just dive into this one a little bit deeper, was about the miscarriage data point, right?
Go on.
Would you be comfortable to go into this in a bit? Okay, so you shared me some, I think just to summarize where we got to last time, right, was I'd misunderstood what data point you were trying to summarize. So let me just recap, right? So what we said is you presented this as a trial of the effects of vaccines on 270 pregnant women.
Okay.
A subset of them were followed up to an outcome, and I think that number was 36, if memory serves, 23 of whom suffered miscarriage, right? So the way I was bringing this back to you was there's no reason to assume that the delta of the 270 and 36, so we're talking about 234 women, have not carried their pregnancy to full term. Your point was that this trial did not follow up with those women, therefore we can only talk about the percentage of those that were followed up versus actually had a miscarriage, which was a abysmally high number, 80% or something similar, right? So I stopped that particular line of inquiry there because I'd misunderstood fundamentally what you were trying to present. And once I did understand that, you kindly provided you kindly provided the details of the actual paper you were referencing. And between then and now, I took some time to go and do some of that reading and try and familiarize myself with the analysis and the summary of it, right? So this bit, I just wanted to see if because I have a much different understanding, you'll be unsurprised to know. And what I'd like to do is just try and get us on the same page if we can here. And this isn't forcing an I'm right, you're wrong scenario, but I do think it's important we have the same understanding of what's being presented. And in facilitating that, if you're willing, I'd like to ask you a couple of questions just so I can clarify how this looks in your mind. And the first one that I have is, would you mind, just I guess for the record, but also so I'm clear, outlining your understanding of how that data on 270 pregnant women who received a vaccine and were noted in the paper, could you give me your understanding of how that data was collected, analysed and summarised?
On a one-to-one level with each of those pregnant women.
Okay, through what mechanism? I just generally, I don't need you to go line item by line item.
No,
I don't. Generally,
I don't know. So I have to trust what's produced in the data by Pfizer, and we have to go by their their set of data on that they've provided.
Okay, so let me just ask you, I'm not trying to nail you to the wall, Chris, I promise, but I am trying to get to the understanding piece, right? Have you read the paper?
The parts that were pertinent to the report that have been made by, was it Sonia Elijah, the researcher?
Okay.
The parts that were pertinent to that, I did scour, but there are other parts of the paper that I probably skimmed over which weren't relevant.
Okay.
Unless you're going to enlighten me differently. So I'm all ears.
I think I am. I think I am, right? So the introduction to that paper clearly details that well, first of all, there's a couple of things to understand. So let me just backtrack a little bit. I think that the summary that you've read of that, and then the subsequent data points that you've dived into, has led you to this isn't aimed at you, but an intentionally distorted representation of the summary. Right.
Okay.
I think that's something that you've read elsewhere that's tried to summarize that finding. They've done so in an intentionally distorted way, which you've self-admitted that you've gone to some of those data points but not looked at them all. So I read the entire paper, right,
okay,
from
well done.
beginning to end. Please don't say well done. It was a catastrophic waste of my time, right? But I felt it was necessary because we have to get this understanding out. Now, so I do think it was presented in an intentionally distorted way, right? It was presented as
the original paper or the report.
No. The report on the paper.
Okay, yeah.
I think that was presented in an intentionally distorted way. Yeah.
Okay.
The paper itself is quite clear; it's objective, and we'll get into that. But this was presented as, and I think your understanding from the last time we spoke, and possibly even still today, is that this is the outcome of a contained trial involving a set number of pregnant women. All right, and the reason I believe that is because you've mentioned things like there was no follow-up on the 230 odd women who we don't have an outcome for. Now, I read in the paper, which is really quite clear in the preface if you want to go back to it,
okay,
is that the data is actually collected from the adverse event reporting systems, plural, from the various different countries that this was rolled out in the early phases. So this report is, just in layman's terms, there's a post-rollout touch point 3 months following the initial sort of getting vaccines into the market. So we had a pre-trial where Pfizer and others were required to demonstrate that in those pre-trials the vaccine is safe, and we can debate that later if you want. But this is a post-rollout checkpoint, right? So the paper is dated April 2021, and it seeks to provide a post-authorization adverse reporting events analysis between the period of December 2020 and February 2021. It's about a 3 month period, right? And that came out then in April once they'd written it up.
Okay.
So that's the key thing. And it does reference some of the various different adverse reporting systems. VAERS is one of them. So now that you know that, I think it's pretty clear that what was in your mind around how this trial was conducted is much different than you thought it was. This is just data that's been pulled up.
I don't think there were 270 women put in a room and they were all pregnant, and then they tested them all and checked in on them daily, and then 200 odd of them have just not been looked at and they've missed it. I understand it not to be like that. I understand that some of the ladies didn't even know they were pregnant when they had the jab, for example. I understand that much.
Okay, so that's probably true as well.
I know that some of the some of the ladies who had the jab in the trials, they don't understand that they were pregnant when they had the jab, and then they've either had a miscarriage or they've come to full term. So I understand there are different variations here, Rob. I understand there's multiple factors involved here, but the raw data that was provided was basically that of the people checked, the percentage was extremely high and concerning, and that for me is the concerning thing. If you can somehow assuage my fears on that, all power to you.
So it's not about assuaging your fears, but I do think there's a correction in understanding. And you mentioned, I've just written down as we were talking, one key thing that you said, which is of the people checked, right? So this is the part where I think we're going to get to hopefully a little bit of a eureka moment on it. What's your understanding of a no outcome report, if you
Yes.
like, from VEAs, or like, what's your understanding of how that could come about?
I guess it would be somebody that's applied to be within the trials, and then they've disappeared. They've died of other causes, and it's not been recorded. They've disappeared off the face of
Interesting.
the-
Okay, interesting that. I find that
There could be. Why do people die? Why do people die? It could be any reason. They could have been dysfunctional people who've basically not reported back in, and there's lots of reasons for this. But for those people, there is no data, so we can't be sure as to what happened to them. And that's during a medical trial that's being rolled out across the world, and we're being told by politicians and leaders and medical experts that it's safe to. In fact, it's beneficial for pregnant women to have this jab. The data doesn't show that, and you can't.
Well, let me just try and correct that.
You'd be just guessing and speculating if you were to take the ladies who weren't followed up and just assume that there was no outcome because they were purely safe, and you can't use that logic. I guess you'd have to use the ones that were included, the ones that did report back in, the ones that did make.
I'm just going to close my office door.
That's fine. Yeah.
Sorry, carry on. Yeah.
I understand what you're saying. I understand. There's no problem clicking with what you're saying. It's just that I understand that you're saying that there's a lot of women who didn't check back in because there was no need to. There was no concerning effects or reactions or events. Sorry, that would force.
Well, I think I am saying that. I definitely am saying that. Yeah. But I think there's still one misunderstanding, right? And I've again just taken note of some wording that you're using. So you're using the word trial, right? This was not a trial. This is the summary of the post-rollout safety, right? So the trials were already concluded by this part. The trials were pre-rollout of the vaccine. This paper summarizes the analysis of the data, which is ingested from the likes of VEAs surrounding the post-rollout safety of the vaccine. It's not a trial. So there's no difference between how you would...
Understood. Yeah, I'm happy with you. Pulling that up.
So let me just explain something in a little bit of granular detail and see how this resonates with you, if it does. A no outcome, like you rightly explained, would be recorded if somebody, well, first of all, they have to get into the VEA's system. So let's just straw man, right? A pregnant lady goes to their GP and they receive a vaccine. They immediately after receiving it feel dizzy. That is an adverse event. I'm being careful this time, right? That's an adverse event. The doctor should be obliged to record in VEAs, this person is feeling dizzy after having received the vaccine. Yep. Now, let's just, there's many things that could happen after this, but let's just follow a train of thought. So the pregnant woman then is told to sit in the waiting room with a glass of water, whatever, for 10 minutes to see if they feel better. Now, let's assume, and I'll take this in a different direction in a second, let's assume they do feel better, right? And they're sent home with the advice that if you feel unwell in any way, come back and seek medical help. Now, let's assume that lady goes off home and doesn't seek any further medical help, right? So that's a no outcome. It's been recorded as a adverse event, but there's no final result there, right? She was just sent away and it's recorded as a no outcome. Pregnant woman B receives the vaccine, same, is dizzy, is recorded in VEAs, is told to sit down and drink a glass of water and come back if they feel giddy later on, right? She subsequently comes back because she feels worse and miscarries. That is recorded in the data under one of those 23 line items. Now, this is the really key point in my mind is there any reason to assume that the 234 women who were recorded in VEAs as having suffered an adverse event subsequently went home, but then didn't come back to seek medical attention? Is there any reason to conclude that any of them did not carry their pregnancy to full term? Given, and I'll just caveat, given that the adverse event reporting system is a voluntary one, it's not a proactive reporting system, which means if someone's been recorded in VEAs, the medical healthcare professional is not required to follow up and say, are you now feeling okay? In fact, given the sheer volume of line items that goes in there, it's probably impractical for them to do that. So the way the system works is go back, go home, and come back if you're feeling bad, and the record will be updated further. That's how it works.
Well, I understand what you're saying. Just to clarify that, I've got no answer for that. We don't. I'd be speculating, Rob. Like, and this is the problem. This is the problem.
Perfect answer. That. Perfect answer. Yeah.
I'd
Perfect
be
answer.
speculating.
You would be speculating. Yeah.
But there's no known outcome. So using logic and science, you're very keen on, there would be no reason to.
I feel like we're nearly there here.
Any outcome on that whatsoever.
Correct.
And therefore, we don't know. Therefore, we don't know.
You and I are well aligned now. I think we're absolutely 100% on the same page. I will just ask you a further question, though, which is the fact that we don't know means we shouldn't assume any of these women did not carry their pregnancies full term, right? Admittedly, we don't know, so we don't make any assumptions, correct?
You're using you do realize that you're using the absolute reverse logic again in a position where it suits the pro-vaccine cause. You're using the absolute reverse logic that had been used and argued against for the entire duration of the pandemic, and for the necessity for the vaccines to even be rolled out. You're using the converse strategy, Rob. You're guilty of this quite a lot.
Let me assume that. Let me concede that that's wrong. Let me assume and concede that logic is wrong, no matter which side it's on. So if I concede, this is the concession, I think, on my side, right? If I'm willing to concede that the logic around assume everyone has got COVID and therefore lock them down is wrong, are you willing to concede that there's no reason we should assume any of these women did not carry their pregnancy to full term?
I'll promise you that I'll reread the data, and if I come to the same conclusion as you about the post rollout data, I would be happy to concede that. But for me,
okay,
I will concede that upon reading the reports of that research scientist and checking the data for myself, then listening to various interviews surrounding that as well, and coming to a conclusion, I will concede that you could be right on that. Those extra, sorry,
there's no surrogate in my mind, Crystal. Yeah, sorry.
I'd be happy to concede that if you pulled me up on something that I got wildly wrong because I've assumed the worst case scenario, which is possible. I guess, Rob, when you have concerns about what's being truthful and who's concealing and suppressing information, when being presented with information like that, I will accept that you look at data like that and you do have your concerns, and then you have politicians pushing it with such gusto that does hold trust issues for me. So yeah. But I will also add that's one issue with the data. Yeah,
I understand.
There are many layers.
Can I just
led me to be suspicious of any of that data? There are many others that I could list. And I don't want to swerve off this specific one, but it's not just I've seen a report, read the headline, gone to the bit, suited myself with the information I've taken in. There's been various other layers of what's happened to make me be very suspicious about whether or not it would be safe for my wife, if she was pregnant, for me to condone her or encourage her to have this jab. It would really concern me. Really,
I understand. I have the same concerns of you. Right? I think I've shared with you before that I was scared of giving this vaccine to my kid. Right, I was deathly afraid of it because as much as I feel like I had enough information to convince myself it was okay, but just hearing people say it's not was frightening me. Right, which is why I wanted to see the data. Two things that I will just say about what you've just mentioned. Right, you've mentioned that you were feeling a certain way, and therefore you've looked at an article which summarizes the data and then dipped into some of it. right? What I'll say to you here, Chris, is, and without accusing you of anything, is there's no surrogate for rolling up your sleeves and reading it all yourself, in my view. That's the only way you can get an objective view.
Well,
because
I'll return to it. I'll return to it, and I will. I think if we chat again like this, I will come back to you. And if you're correct in what you're saying, that there is concerns about how the data has been harvested, or about the reporting, then
well, it's the way that the report is being summarized is the concern in my mind, right?
Well, okay.
Reading it, it's boring, by the way. It's shit boring.
Yeah,
it's necessary. It's necessary to understand the detail.
And sometimes you I mean, last week you said you trust the experts.
Just one point before we move on, because I think we are going to move on, and I'll let you move on, is that you mentioned something now which really, I wrote it down again because I think it's really important to understand and acknowledge, is that you said verbatim, when you have concerns like this, you look at data and it pricks your ears up, right? You know, this is kind of what you've said. Now, what I could re-summarize that sentence is to saying, you going into certain discussions, arguments, debates with a preconceived notion of what that is going to look like, because understandably you're concerned, but you are going into some of this stuff with a preconceived notion. And I think you will see, I'm desperately hoping you will see, once you revisit this data and read it all, I think you'll come to the same conclusion that I did. And I think you will acknowledge that you went in with a preconceived notion.
Possibly on that point, yeah, possibly I concede that I could have different.
Well, let me stop ramming this one down your throat, right? I think
I've done picture in my mind on that, which could be different. It could be changed. I'm open to that, and
I hope you are, Chris. I really do hope you are.
Ultimately, I would hope that the jab would not be that dangerous. I would sincerely pray and hope that it is not that dangerous and people haven't been taking it with these huge risks attached. I would pray and hope that I am wrong. That's how I am. I pray and hope that I'm wrong. I want to be wrong about this. There's no way I would sit there and gloat with the miscarriages and births totting up. There's no way I would gloat. I was going to add something else then, but I know that we'll stay on the line of that. So go on, you lead. Where would you like to go next? If I go back and return to the paper and come back next time and I say tick,
yeah,
you're right, or you know, if I've got
so what I'd want to move on to next, and if I could, and you can stop me and divert me in a different direction if you want to, right? But what I would like to move on to next is, I'm going to operate on the assumption, and you just forgive me for doing this, is that you are going to read that data, you are going to be with me, and you are going to come back and say, okay, I've gone into that particular data point with a preconceived notion. How grandiose of me to say that, right? But
you know what you're doing there, don't you? You're taking a leap, Rob.
I'm taking a leap. I am, admittedly, yeah.
Oh, all right.
Look, there is based on that.
I'll take a leap with you, right? And say, right, okay, next time we chat, you'll be conceding that the data at the beginning of the pandemic was flawed. And I'll be the summary of it, I guess. And maybe the representation of the miscarriage data by that researcher was possibly flawed, and possibly I then formed an opinion based on possibly a flawed representation, possibly.
So where, yeah, okay. So I'm happy for you to stick with possibly. Where I want to take this now is, this has been agonizingly painful. Right, this particular point for me has been unenjoyable, agonizingly painful, boring as shit, and frankly, again, just a waste of time digging into this one data point surrounding the miscarriage thing. Right, I've hated it, to be honest, Chris, but I'm being intentionally pedantic and drilling into it because for me, it's indicative of a wider problem that I think you have, which is exactly what you've described. Is you look at data points, summaries of them, through rose-tinted sunglasses, and I think you're looking at things that are backing up your preconceived notion of what vaccines are, what they're doing, what they're not doing. So that is for me, and I used the word epistemology last time. That for me is how you are building your epistemology. You're doing it on the basis of, this is one snippet, but this is one of 100 examples. And if I was doing the same thing, I would also be of the view that vaccines are killing people, they're dangerous, they're not working. And that for me is just one example out of 100 as a building block, one of the stages of the cross, if you like, for how you've got to where you are today. That's my view.
What you want me to respond to? You accuse
Not necessarily. I'm making a statement, but I assume you will want to respond.
Well, that's your opinion. That's your opinion. I can promise you, I've read different articles, different pieces by different. I mean, you used the term "I trust the experts." I'm on the side of the experts. That's what you said last week.
Yeah.
I've listened to the supposed correct experts, and I've listened also to the experts who've been deplatformed, censored, banned, risked their whole livelihoods and careers. They've been, and you mentioned about this alternative media being a surrogate for actual data and all of this, but I would say that the people, once you've listened, if you were to listen to some of the alternative media experts, which some of them are, some of the most renowned scientists in the world have sacrificed their careers by pulling up certain information about the jabs being unsafe, or the pandemic not being quite as it should be represented, or about the necessity for lockdowns. It seems like, Rob, there's been a massive trust issue built up with me, because I've literally witnessed what's been represented on the news by the so-called experts, and then I've been out and about around the country, literally around the country during the whole pandemic, into people's houses and seeing the reality of the situation rather than just a number on a screen. So I would agree that that is a symptom of the distrust that's been sown in our institutions. There is a huge element of distrust, and then it can make people become extremely resistant then to any information that's presented that is correct. And I agree with that.
Yeah.
But I think this has made me so, this whole period of the last 2 or 3 years has made me so cynical, suspicious. If anything, you're probably quite right. If there's a scientist that's deplatformed or ridiculed or mocked, it would make me more interested to see what they're saying, because you only get flack when you're over the target, Rob. And there's a big problem at the moment with disingenuous people holding on to careers and using slogans like misinformation or right-wing conspiracy bigot and all of this, when if you listen to what some of these deplatformed experts are saying, a lot of it makes a lot more sense than what, for example, Matt Hancock was saying, or Nadine Zahawi was saying, or who have very, very vested interests in upholding the narrative and putting us all into a position of fear and turning away from the people who are trying to stand up for it. Now, that's more about the epistemology of where I'm at and the core beliefs I hold. And I will say, Rob, I'll repeat what I said last week, which is I came from a position where I trusted the system, did trust it. It's been eroded. The more I've learned over the last 20 years, the more I've read, the more I've seen, the more I've taken interest in politics, the more I've taken interest in different systems of government, the more I've seen that it's polluted. And there's a lot of people with a lot to gain by upholding a polluted system. And there's a lot to lose for people who are going to stand up and say, I'm going to call you out on corruption. There's a lot of people who've sacrificed their careers. And that's made me very unlikely, I will admit it, to trust what the politicians, for a start, are saying. I'm very surprised by the medical establishment over the last 2 or 3 years, it looks like to me they've been unable to actually choose which way to go, uphold the Hippocratic Oath, or go where the money is and protect themselves. It's not just Rob, me watching a YouTube clip and then repeating what I've heard. It's thousands of hours of books.
Yeah, okay, I understand.
Experts.
The last thing I want to do is be condescending towards you, right? That's not my intention, is to be condescending. But can I just respond to a couple of things that you mentioned there, right?
Can I just
so
add
when you
one,
talk about,
can I add one extra thing?
Yeah.
Just one extra thing, which would be during the pandemic, a lot of people were saying, "Oh, is it been peer reviewed?" The peer review system also seems to have a lot of pollution in it, a lot of nepotism, a lot of money attached to certain scholarships and grants and research funding. The whole thing seems to be a circle, and then you've got philanthropy, which just seems to be basically a way of laundering money or sponsoring people or getting the right answer from medical research. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of money swishing around. There's a lot of careers based on this, and there's a lot happening at the moment behind the scenes, Rob, I will say as well, where a lot of people seem to be now closing up the drawbridge because they realize that they've been acting inappropriately, whether they knew it or not. The book might stop with them, and a lot of medical people are going to be subject to the Nuremberg Code, and now I think they realize that the medical Pfizer, Moderna, they're ring-fenced themselves, and it's going to be the taxpayers that are going to be paying out money for the compensation that's due to people who've been misled. Anyway, sorry, that was my final point. Well, thanks for letting me speak.
No, I'm trying to be better. So there's a couple of things in there, right? The overarching message that you're giving is your trust in institutions has been eroded. Now, I'll come to that in a minute, but I just want to make one point, which is you say this isn't all about watching a teenager in YouTube rant about the danger of vaccines, and I accept that it's not, right? Again, I don't want it to seem like I'm being condescending, and I'm not putting you in that box, but I'm sort of going to at the same time, because the equivalent of what we just experienced with this particular data point on pregnant women is the equivalent of what you've just described, which is someone with a preconceived notion, probably an agenda to spread fear about the vaccine, has summarized a report in a spurious way, and you've accepted it. That for me is no different than listening to someone talk on YouTube. So, and again, I'm not being combative here, right? But when you say I've spent hundreds of hours, I've read, I've done this and I've done that, my experience with you, Chris, is you haven't read the salient data. You've read summaries of it. And that's like a recurring theme that I'm finding. This is objective statement. It's not accusing you of anything.
I understand.
Right?
Yeah.
So you say I spent hundreds and hundreds of hours of reading. My perception, based on my interactions with you, is you spent hundreds and hundreds of hours of reading spurious summaries of real data, which you can get in and dig into, but you just haven't. That's my experience.
Fair play to you.
So that's just a point I wanted to make.
Well,
but trust in institutions. So this one, again, I think it's important for me to be precise here, right? Because I have said trust the experts. And what I probably should have said here is trust the expertise. That's probably a better way to say this, because I do not believe, generally speaking, in an argument from authority, right? So if someone's going to stand and say, I have this particular qualification, therefore you should believe me when I say that the vaccines are safe, that for me doesn't hold as much weight as if someone is speaking on behalf of an institution that carries the expertise and has a track record of delivering X, Y, and Z. So, these names will definitely balk you, but like, if I talk about the CDC, for me, that's an institution that has built up a track record, although they have made significant mistakes and should be held accountable for them. Their track record is they've driven society in the right direction. Therefore, there should be an element of trust that we place in the CDC. There should also be, again, accountability if one of them makes a misstep and fucks something up catastrophically. But I don't think what we should be doing is throwing out the baby with the bathwater when we see one of our institutions screw something up. All right. So that's kind of the specific clarity that I want to give there. Trust the experts for me. And what I mean is the expert being the institution, not the individual person. I won't take any one person's word for it. But institutions, I do believe we have to. Society is going to collapse if we stop relying on institutions wholeheartedly, right? Institutions. Let's just talk
What do
about
you mean, like get locked
most
down
of the
completely?
institutions.
Society will
No, no.
stop.
So what I'm saying, no. What I'm saying is, most institutions, I can guarantee you will trust. Right? United Utilities Water, you will trust them with dealing with your sewage. You're not questioning that, to my knowledge. Right? And I bet there's 99% of all institutions that have an effect on your life you rely on, because we have to. And if we don't, society is going to break down. You're cherry picking the ones that you want to decide to not trust. And that's contrarianism.
You're putting words in my mouth.
That's not.
You're putting words in my mouth.
Yeah.
I've got a huge distrust for members of parliament at the moment. There doesn't seem to be any accountability or opposition. There was no opposition. They were all one colour. The media used to pride themselves on producing a scoop, which is some alternative information that they've dug out. But for 2 years, all of the main news media, legacy media, was in tune, in lockstep with each other. There was even Keir Starmer, who was being primed to be the next prime minister of this country, is seen standing alongside Rishi Sunak, applauding everything that he's applauding at the moment. He's saying that he wants to essentially devolve sovereignty from the UK to the World Economic Forum. He's been saying in an interview, how can you trust that this man has our best interests at heart? But when the people representing us on that front are willing to literally commit treason against us, literally. Doctors, they were being incentivized, Rob, to this is swerving off a little bit, but it's a demonstration of doctors were incentivized to bat people away if they did have an adverse reaction that suggest that they themselves were suspicious of it being caused by the jab. And also they were being incentivized to actually give out the jab to younger and younger people as during the pandemic, when it hadn't been proven whether or not it was even necessary for the younger generation. There's lots of people in lots of institutions that have been protecting themselves, or there is possibly another explanation, which is it's so compartmentalized that they didn't even know what they were doing was wrong. They're just saying, we've got to follow orders. It's come from the top. And it's happened in...
Assuming it is wrong.
Sorry,
assuming it was wrong. That's yet to be established, right?
About what was wrong?
You said, well, whatever fact it is you're claiming is wrong. I mean, what you said was the institutions were so compartmentalized that they didn't know what they were doing was wrong. Whatever fact it is you're saying is wrong is the point is that whatever fact it is you're saying was wrong, as in this conversation at least, yet to be determined.
Okay, understood. But I would say that anybody who stood up against or was concerned about anything, even the wearing of masks, was reprimanded, othered, and when it came out that masks actually have very little to no effect on transmission. Rob, I've just laid a lot out there, but you're interested to hear what I thought and why my trust is so diminished. But it does appear that the main three during the pandemic have been our politicians, the medical establishment, and the news media. I'd say it's rotten. A lot of it's rotten. I don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater, but they're not functioning properly. There's no accountability. Politics is a procession of a carousel of puppets that are interchangeable, that are never accountable. Even when it comes out reports years later that they acted inappropriately, it's lessons will be learned. Medical establishment compartmentalized. A lot of GPs they've earned a lot of money over the last 2 years off the back of people's misery. They've not even been accountable themselves. They've done checkups over Zoom. I mean, I could go on. There's hundreds of examples. Cops as well, Rob. Cops, I'd say cops have really diminished in my trust. That when they were arresting little old ladies having their final walk on a beach with their daughter because they were contravening newly installed COVID regulations, they've stepped over the mark. They're supposed to be on our side. They're supposed to protect us, solve crime, not go around issuing £60 fixed penalty notices for having a walk during a time of stress and misery for everybody. This is where it falls down for me, the trust.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
sorry,
and look, you're probably fine.
And I've kind of gone on, but I mean, we can come down to the very science of it, but ultimately, a lot of
no. Let's not do that. Let's not do that because we get bogged down, don't we? I think we've taken the science part in the last conversation, I think, to the level we needed to take it to, and I'm satisfied with where we got to on that. So let's not do that. Let's have a bit more of a hopefully interesting conversation, at least, if not just for you and me, for any poor soul who decides to listen in, right?
Well, go on. Sorry, your turn. Your turn. Sorry.
I think what you'll probably find, Chris, is we are closer aligned on your level of disgust with certain institutions than you think we are, right? I agree with most of what you said, actually. I agree with most of what you said. I do. I mean, I think, politicians are inherently liars. It's almost part of the JD, right? Seeing, exactly what you said, seeing police officers issue penalty notices to old ladies who are walking on the beach. I'm not aware of that particular story, but I can believe it's true. It's ridiculous. It's disgusting and it's ridiculous and it's a waste of public resources, right? I agree with all of that, actually. You sold. You don't need to say any more on that. I agree. But my point is exactly the one that my point is exactly what I said before, though, right? Which is that the failure of institutions need not lead to the total breakdown of institutions, right? And because I think once we get there, at least in our minds, what it leads to is the promotion of this amateur hour culture, which seems to be pervasive in today's kind of society. My view is that probabilistically, you're always wise to be guided by institutional consensus, right? If you're looking for a view from someone who holds, broadly speaking, the same views as the one that you hold, then, and if you then go ahead and just present that person as the sort of holder of the truth, which it seems like, I'm not trying not to put words in your mouth, but you are saying, like this one individual who's a qualified whatever is saying this. If you put that sort of trust in that one person as the holder of the truth, then it goes all the way full circle back to the point I made earlier, which is that that's you being guided by your confirmation bias, right? So probabilistically, you're better to be guided by institutional consensus. And the moment that breaks down, everyone's lost. I mean, society is literally going to break down.
I know what you're saying. I understand what you're saying. But I would say that I reached my concerns about the miscarriage data not just via one researcher. It was via many reports.
But did you read the data, Chris? That's the point.
Pardon?
I mean, did you read the data? Is the point. I mean,
I'll revisit it like we've agreed, and I don't want to labour over that. If I'm wrong, I'll hold my hands up. But allow me to revisit it. I think that's fair. But I understand what you're saying as well. There can be a big cloud of confusion caused rather than just follow the narrative, follow the consensus, follow the data prepared for us by these institutions. Well, Rob, that is where the problem comes when they won't even allow themselves to be scrutinised. The MHRA, the European Medical Association, they've all acted outside of their. I mean, there's a big example of this, which is where is it Amanda van der Leyen or Ursula van der Leyen? She no longer has the information or the emails or the text messages that she organised the rollout of the jab with the head of Pfizer, Albert Bourla. She's no longer got. she was asked to provide the information, where she's literally organized, well, I think it was 10 consecutive jabs for each member of the whole of the EU. And there was, I mean, but not only should that have been discussed, you know, it should have been open to scrutiny and transparency. Instead, she's organized it personally with him, and there's no notes of minutes of a meeting. There's no emails. There's nothing. She said it was organized by text messages, and they've gone. When there was a meeting, a commission that the EU set up to investigate this, Albert Bourla failed to turn up. And the lady that he sent instead said, well, at the time we were moving at the speed of science, which is, that doesn't instill any confidence in me whatsoever that these guys have acted properly. They've got no transparency. They don't stand up to scrutiny. And that's just at the very top. All the way down the line, for me, there is gaping holes. Now, obviously, with the miscarriage dates there, Rob, you might have found a hole in my reckoning there, which I'll accept if it's true. But all the way along, you can scrutinize this. You can find. Well, you can scrutinize.
I think we can only scrutinize things that are specific, right? And then I can't comment on what you just said, because you're bringing new things, something new to me, and I'm not going to try and stop you from doing that in this conversation, right? Because I know that was the feedback from the last conversation. So go ahead. But I mean, my point is that when
it is stuff that I was trying to share, I did share it, and I think you pulled me up on when I shared something on social media. It's one of the things that you pulled me up on, where you're saying, Chris, you're sharing misinformation, and Chris, you've been where's your data? But it was information about that these improprieties had happened and these people are acting outside of any kind of jurisdiction.
Let me take it on face value that you're right. Let me just, for the sake of argument, let me just take it on face value that what you're saying is correct. And let's assume I've been off and done my check-in, which I'm not going to do. I've spent days on this shit already. let's assume that I've gone and done that, and I agree with your finding.
I can share it with you.
The way that particular. No, that's fine. But let me just take for on face value that what you're saying is true. Where does that lead this discussion? Because I think what we're talking about is you having a solid view that certain things are epistemologically true, right? One is vaccines are creating harm. The other is vaccines do not work. The second is vaccine cases are overreported. Now, let's assume what you're saying about that specific thing is true. And let's assume that points to a massive hole in the way that this particular process of whatever it was run badly, under corruption even, and let's even go that far, right? Let's assume that's all true. Does that mean that some of the epistemological beliefs that you hold are by necessity true? No, it does not. It means we should hold people accountable for the things that they're doing wrong.
Part of the Nuremberg Code, it states that you should have all of the dangers and the benefits of certain treatment listed, and ultimately at the end of the day the person administering it should always leave an option for the patient to say no action, decline. And that's just one gaping hole that every single person administering this jab has committed. It's
no one's forced to take a vaccine, though, Chris. Do you know? I mean, no one's been strapped to a chair and forced to take one, right? I'm aware of.
It's listed in the Nuremberg Code about coercion, propaganda, fraud as well.
No, but that's opaque, right? Because you and I are going to have a very different. We're going to disagree very wildly on what is coercion and what is not. So you can't start saying, this is kind of illegal or whatever else you might want to say. We have to agree first of all on what is coercion. Right. My point is that no one's been strapped to a chair and had a needle forced into their arm, to my knowledge.
There have been children where that's happened and have not been able to give consent because they're under the age of consent, and then they've been literally restrained. So I would try and
accepted. But I presume other medical interventions that involve children, you wouldn't object to that same approach, depending on the nature of the intervention.
Yes.
So we have to be consistent as well.
Especially especially like say if they needed a heart transplant, you've got to subdue them, and then they need a heart transplant.
Well, even polio vaccine, for example. I'm assuming you believe in polio vaccines.
I'm not going to be pulled into polio. I'm not going to be pulled into that.
Okay,
no
fine,
comment
fine,
on that.
Fine.
But
fine.
that's a whole different conversation. That's a whole different one. I'll put my guardrails on that, please.
No problem. Okay, but let's assume you do believe that some medical intervention on children that are not of the age where they can consent is necessary. Right? Assuming you agree that.
I'd say with a lot of trauma injury, yeah, but a lot of preventative stuff that with vaccines, I'd say the more I've looked into that as well, the more there are suggestions that a lot of them might be overkill or unnecessary or other.
So this isn't a view that you hold just for COVID vaccines. I guess your sentiment towards vaccines is.
I would say, and I'll leave it here. I'm not going to get dragged into but that whole world. But I'd say the more research that you undertake generally regarding vaccines, you understand that the data presented, say for example, a disease, chart goes up, vaccine comes out, injuries, events of said disease go down. It usually also coincides with other things. I would say, to put it in a cheerful way, I would say that a lot of vaccines appear to be like John Terry, where they'll put a kit on once the cup's been won. A lot of vaccines seem to coincide with the disease already sloping off, and herd immunity or different social economic changes happening, like for example slum clearances and sanitation, etc. So again, if you were to go to the data sets on those, you'd find that there were questions. I wouldn't say that I'm definitive on it, but I would say that there are certain questions where changing a child's environment to a more clean.
Can I say with a 98% certainty that you have not been to the original data sets?
There are some data which I've approached similar to how you've identified before, or I've gone to specific bits. But
so my view on that is, I'm trying to choose my
words
incredibly carefully.
My
view is that you specifically you, Chris, are not a fit judge of scientific consensus, because your track record shows that you don't read comprehensive data. You pick and choose and summarize and look at things that are presented in a spurious way. So again, this is not an accusation, but it's not.
I know I can handle it, but it's interesting when you do go to certain parts of data and find that what's been presented as an overall vaccines are good. It's that's very.
I didn't realize that was your view. Actually, my worry now is. Yeah.
I'm not saying definitively. I'm just saying more I've looked into stuff, the more that there are certain things that you could say, well, actually, was it the vaccine that really, cured this or saved that? Was it really that alone? There are layers, but the vaccine is held up by scientific zealots as this all-saving cure. There is one thing that I'd refer you back to, Rob. This might be new information, but with the transmission of the COVID was at R level 1, which is where it was being transmitted like sort of exponentially at a certain rate. Yeah, the R1 rate was given to it when lockdowns happened. But there was a suggestion that maybe even COVID had been in the UK. I'm only talking about UK here. In the UK for a couple of months prior to that, maybe even since November 2019. Am I right in that? And they suggest that if it had been spreading at that rate, then potentially the whole of the nation would have come into contact with it anyway by that point, before there was even a pandemic announced. It's very unusual.
Yeah, I have no way to.
No, I know.
It's not like I don't want to engage that. I have no way to respond. Yeah.
So the whole knee-jerk reaction, and then the pandemic based on basically everyone testing 3 times a week. I mean, there's holes all the way along, Rob. I actually would go as far as, I'm not going to be drawn on the vaccines thing, because obviously they've helped humanity.
No, that's fine. And to be honest, I have little appetite to get into it, because I didn't realize, I have a sense we're about to open a huge Pandora's box. And my worry now is that I'm the one who's going to start looking like a little bit of a mug here, because my assumption was going into this that you and I would be able to intersect somewhere on the Venn diagram in terms of our mutual understanding of what reality looks like. And now my concern is that we don't. My analogy now is that I'm now starting to think that you and I are walking around on different floors of the same hotel, hoping to meet and shake hands. And that's just, it's not going to be possible, because our foundation of the understanding of the nature of what reality is just different. And I don't know if that just makes me a mug for engaging to this level, because I know you don't want to be drawn, and I don't want to draw you, but I've already got an indication as to where you're leaning on certain things. And if this contrarianism seems to go way beyond COVID vaccines, COVID transmission, trust in institutions. This seems to be incredibly wide. It's my sense now, and I'm sort of concerned that I shouldn't have engaged to begin with.
That's okay. So we're getting to the bones of that. You drew me on the vaccines, and I gave you a little bit of politician's answer. I would say that the way I've looked at things, granted, it would bring me to be suspicious of some of the medical technologies that have arrived in the last sort of like 100 years. And whether
are you suspicious of insulin as a cure for diabetes, or are you suspicious of insulin as a treatment for diabetes?
I've not looked at that, but what I would say is that a diet would be a better treatment for a lot of cases of diabetes than automatically jumping into the allopathic world, which is what we did immediately when there was a pandemic in this country, and it was stated, and everyone locked up, went home. It was wait for the vaccine. There was no other alternatives, as far as I'm aware, that were looked into. We were banned from sunshine, gyms, speaking with each other in the flesh, all of the things that naturally keep us healthy. We weren't allowed to do.
What about antiviral? Yeah, sorry, I'm just jumping. Because I'm getting a bit concerned here, right? So, can I just ask you, what is your view on antiviral therapy as a treatment for HIV? Do you think
viral therapy? I wouldn't know that much about it, Rob. To be honest, okay.
Is there any reason for you to doubt that it's kosher, or I mean, is it?
I'd have to look into it. I'd have to. Okay. I have certain concerns.
I see where we are. Yeah.
I'd have certain concerns about
anything.
Sorry, I lost my thread then. Well, Rob, a lot of what we seem to be told by the institutions in which you seem to be demanding that I put my trust into, a lot of the information.
I'm not demanding. No.
Sorry, all right. You're saying that we should trust them above all of the people who take time to scrutinize or to look into.
Even should would probably be a strong statement. I mean, what I'm saying is it's not logical to not do that. Probabilistically speaking, that's the way to find the right path in terms of what is true, what is not true.
Well, I would say that it's there's a lot of information out there that's that would prevent even having to approach a doctor, but which we're denied and we're not taught. It's automatically assumed that if we have a problem, we go and get a pill. I would say that without going into all of the detail, there is a lot to be said for human well-being. Before entering into the world of science, before even arguing about science.
Yeah.
And I know that you're looking a bit forlorn there, Rob. Like,
I am, Chris. To be honest, because this is.
Is it an eye?
Yeah, yeah, it really is actually.
So
yeah.
the first thing
it's
you
a
do,
real eye opener.
First thing that you automatically do is always just consult a doctor first with any ailment ever.
I didn't know. Well, that's very far from what I said. But my big concern is that what's being unveiled to me here is that there is a generic and broad inherent distrust of certainly what you're saying, medicine and medical professionals, not just as it relates to COVID, but just broadly. And I'm worried that the more we get into conversations around the way you build this worldview, the more contrarian this is going to be, and it's probably going to be way wider than I ever imagined it would be. And my concern is that I probably shouldn't have even been involved in this from the start. That's my concern. Again, the Venn diagram, it was overlapping when I joined this call with you, and I think it's going like this. I think we're just operating in different universes, you and I.
Well, there are certain points with the medical establishment where there's evidence to say that a lot of the treatments dished out by doctors don't actually treat the actual cause. They just facilitate the symptoms to be subdued enough to keep the pills going. I don't think that's controversial to say it. I don't think that's controversial to say that diabetes, diet is rarely discussed as a concern. They're given more treatment, allopathic treatment.
Yeah, I think.
Well, you asked, didn't you? You asked about vaccines generally, and
yeah, I did. I guess this is my faux pas. I was operating on an assumption that just in general we were aligned on most things, and this was a sticking point that we weren't aligned on. But I'm seeing more and more that that's actually not true. Look, I have enjoyed this chat actually, Chris, but with respect, I think I'm probably going to bow out at this point, to be honest.
Would you I've allowed you to lead for a lot of the last couple of hours. Would you allow me to ask you a quick couple of points about your epistemology?
Yeah.
What, and what, booking another session, or is that it? You've had enough?
I think I need to just take a bit of stock, to be honest.
Let's have a break. You watch it back. If you're happy with what you hear, fine. If you're not, you scrap it. And I thought we were reaching a you've claimed that you're open-minded about things, but it seems to me like you're building a wall up every time I introduce any new information or I try and explain my my route to things. You're putting up kind of objections.
So I think that's really unfair, because I think whenever you present me with something that I can dig into, I do, and I do come back with a follow-up, right? So I think that's really unfair. I think that's not representative of the reality, actually, Chris. I think that's pretty unfair. And what I would say is open-mindedness should not be swapped out for contrarianism. And I think my counterclaim to you is that you're being a contrarian. Right. So I don't think open-mindedness is what you're doing here. I don't think it's because, of course, science is up to be questioned. However, poking a hole, or trying to poke a hole and continuing to try and do so over and over again and failing, that's not how you do science, right? So I think you've just been massively unfair to me by saying that I'm open-minded, but not to the extent where my brain's going to fall out, I think is the way I would describe my view here, right? There's certain things that, you can't go around questioning absolutely everything in your life. It's just not a way to be a functioning person in the world. You can't do that, right?
Well, I think putting your ultimate trust in institutions that have been known to be flawed for a good time is also
have flaws would be a more accurate way to describe, rather than say flawed. Have flaws. So what most institutions do.
Can you? I'd be struggling to name one politician that I trust.
I might agree with you on that point, but it doesn't lead me to.
I'm struggling to name. I mean, the Johnson & Johnson jab was banned in lots of countries. Would you argue that trusting their institutions on banning it would be flawed, or where would you stand on that? The Pfizer booster has just been withdrawn on the 12th of February in this country because it's unsafe, Rob. Now the booster is.
I very much okay. I've heard you say that, and there's no way for me to verify it one way or the other. Well, I would love to go and see wording that says this booster is unsafe.
All right. Well, it's
my 98% certainty,
unnecessary and not
98% certainty that you have either misrepresented that or misunderstood that. 98% certain that that's not the reason it was withdrawn.
Well, all right, then it's not the cost benefit analysis of certain age groups.
Okay,
but
do you see, Chris? But honestly, look, be honest with yourself, right? If not me, do you not see the massive gap between those two things? You've just said, right? This came from your mouth, right? That the booster has been withdrawn because it's not safe, and you've literally just changed that story to the cost benefit analysis doesn't stand up. That is, those things are so different.
If it was 100% safe, they would have no qualms in just keeping it rolled out. But because recently,
and there's your leap.
Well, therefore, it's become less beneficial and more unsafe to administer it than is worthwhile.
Where are you pulling that data from? Where are you pulling that data from? You've just made a very epistemologically objective statement, and I need you to verify that.
Well, from the very beginning of this pandemic, it was evident that only 2 children, I think under the age of 16, ever died of COVID alone. That means that there's literally about 1 in 10 million chance of a child dying from COVID. But there was
efficacy is one thing, but you're talking about safety.
But then the safety of the jab was meaning that again, we're going back to the yellow card scheme here, which you've got a lack of trust in for some reason.
No, I don't. No.
Which we've discussed. Well, all
I
right,
never said that I didn't trust it.
Sorry, you've got a lack of confidence in that the data is linked. We've been over that, but that's the negative of what you said, right? You said I didn't trust it. I never said that. My bad.
What I said is there's no evidence that any of the data in there about adverse events being linked to a COVID jab have ever been brought to light. That's massively different than what you said.
I think it's understood. Either way, there was evidence that certain people of certain age groups were experiencing more certain adverse reactions. Now, it appears
adverse events, Chris. Adverse events.
Okay, but they've now pulled it back from those age groups because they realise that it's more of a risk than it is the benefit to administer it to those age groups. So why would that be the case, Rob? If what you're saying is that it's so positive about this treatment, why have they withdrawn the boosters for people? It's when it's exactly
you're bringing this information to me. You're bringing this information to me cold. I don't know.
Okay, well, you're welcome to have a look at that. From the 12th of February, boosters were no longer.
Yeah, I think. Look, I am open-minded, and I'd like to think that during the amount of time that we've spent talking to each other over these videos and over Facebook, that I've proved that I'm willing to go and look into a data point. But what I will say is, you've just told me to go and spend another day looking at a data point that you've brought to me, right? I'll tell you now, I'm not going to do that.
Oh, fair enough. But
it's eating into my family time. And what actually is happening now is every time I do dive in, I find, and I conclusively, I think, did that at the beginning of this call. Fine, you can go and read the data yourself. But I think I conclusively showed that you throw out a data point without having researched properly. I research and I show it to be a nothing burger. And I'm 98% sure that what you've just thrown out to me, I would go and spend a day diving into, and I'd come back and we'd have the same, and you would throw me another data point. And this is, I have a full-time job and I have a family, and this now is just becoming untenable for me.
Okay, well, okay, so
I think you can probably see that I'm probably getting towards.
You get a bit frustrated, aren't you?
Frustration is probably the wrong word. I'm a bit mortified in myself for not picking this up earlier, really, which is that
I think you've been a bit. I've always stated that I come from a place of where I believe to be I care and that I'm willing to remain open-minded. But as I've stated,
I don't think open-minded describes your mentality. To be honest, I don't think that's what it is. Yeah, I think it's contrarianism, which is very different.
Well, I think quite logically, which is a lot of the institutions.
I think I've shown that you don't.
I think well, the logic would say to me that if they've just stopped the booster jabs for people other than extremely vulnerable people in extremely vulnerable age categories, you literally can't book in for a booster now in the UK, Rob.
So I think I've demonstrated, Chris, that you don't think logically.
Well, but my logic would say, why have they done that? Why have they stopped it? Is it because
I don't know, because you're bringing this data to me cold, but where we've had the chance to mutually go and look at a data set, I've proved that you don't think logically, and I'm sure that I would prove it with this if I had the time or inclination to look at it, but I'm not going to.
I might have missed the full report on the Pfizer. Yeah, I might.
But that's the foundation of logic. That's the foundation of logic, right? That's the foundation of logic. If arming yourself with all of the information, 100% of the information, is the foundation of logic. So I think I've conclusively shown that you don't think logically on these matters.
Well, I am thinking logically when I'm saying you're saying that you'd be confident in having more boosters, but literally in the UK now, since the 12th of February, you can't in my age category because it's not available unless you're in a very vulnerable position. Why would they do that? And I would say that logically thinking it's because suddenly the medical establishment has realized that the book is going to stop with them on an individual level with the very people who
massively. Yeah, that's a massive leap.
But Rob, there's new data points that I've been introducing for the entire chats we've been having, and the things that I was literally trying to share a year ago, 2 years ago. Now we're going back in, and like you're trying to say, I don't think logic.
But so let's talk about this one thing, right? So you just said that people of a certain age who can't get the booster. You have jumped to the assumption that it's because of safety, right? A very off the top of my head example of why that might be because the government have run out of money. I'm probably wrong, but that's my leap. Right? I'm going to leap in that direction. You've leapt in a different direction. It's likely, in my mind, neither of us are true. Neither of us are right. But you're not trying to get to the truth. You're just leaping around.
Well,
and I can do that as well.
Yesterday, Rob, I tried to call yesterday on the NHS helpline to book in for one. Nobody was willing to book me in for one. And they kept referring me back to the NHS website.
So therefore I assume that my answer is correct, which is because they ain't got any money, they can't do it. That's my leap.
It's because they know that the adverse.
Why do you think that? Why do you think that? I think, Chris, it's because they've run out of money. Why do you think?
Fair enough. If you
but this isn't how we do reasoning.
It should either come down. Your healthcare should come down to whether or not it's necessary or not whether or not.
But this isn't how we do reasoning. This isn't how we do reasoning. We have to look at the facts. We have to look at the data. You have to understand the problem. Don't jump. You can't just say logically, I'm going to assume this to be the reason. It's just not how we reason. I don't know how to. I honestly don't know how to describe that any differently.
I think you're accusing me of being just literally contrarian for the sake of it, and also to not be thinking logically. When I think a lot of people during the whole crisis have had the reverse happen to them, Rob, where they've been told not to think, follow instructions, trust the institutions. And that's how this whole thing has actually happened.
Yeah,
you're a very different character. I'll give you that, because I do respect you. Give kudos for giving this a go and having a chat with me and all of that. Kudos, and I think you really do go for the specific data. But on the whole, I think most people have all taken a leap and said, well, on this one occasion, will grant all of the institutions full trust. Anyone who dares to speak out or scrutinize them will be disregarded, censored, and deplatformed. Yeah. And on this occasion only, we'll have to trust them. And at every point that's been scrutinized, you pulled me up on a couple of things there. But
those couple of things, and the intention for me was not to just get bogged down in tiny little things, right? But it's meant to do one thing, which is articulate the way that you think is faulty by looking at specifics. And I think that's what we've done. Listen, I've got to go out for dinner now, so I've run over by a little bit.
I'll stop recording now.
Look, let's do.
I'll stop recording. Yeah. Nice one.